I was just wondering what your expectation might be for today, since we have a nice small group.
I was going to say,
okay.
This is a first for me too, so I have no, yeah.
So what interested you?
Yeah, there you are.
She lent me, what's it called? Screwtape letters that I was reading, and then I saw the thing come up on Facebook and was like,
C.S. Lewis.
okay.
Oh, cool. All right.
So it was the connection to C.S. Lewis?
That's what it was, yes.
All right.
I got some. If you haven't seen the movie Nefarious, that's really good.
I'm telling
Crap,
everybody,
that's
like,
so
yeah,
solid.
you've got to go see the
It is very good.
It's coming out on DVD real soon, I think.
Yeah, it gives chills.
It might be
Okay.
Yeah, it's worth seeing for sure.
What's it called?
Nefarious. I was even thinking of like somehow screening it here or in COD. It's pretty strong. It's a very strong movie.
It's good. It's good.
It's so the premise is there's a psychologist, an atheistic, materialistic psychologist that sits down with a guy who says he's possessed by a demon. It's roughly a conversation for 2 hours.
Wow.
It takes place in 3 rooms, and it's grabs your attention the entire time. It's really good. Expectations?
So in the film, he did not have a possession?
Well, you
we can't spoil
get to figure that one out, man. No, it's 2 hours. It is worth seeing.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of that goes on. You're like, I think I got a name.
Feel free to grab snacks if you like.
Depends on your
Coffee there as well if you like coffee.
They go over that pretty well, and actually it is a lead up for C.S. Lewis. He says you let a little thing in, and you just keep making exceptions, and that little thing grows into something big. Really.
Yep, that's the cup there.
Anyway, that's Nefarious. I'm trying to talk about what's your expectations for today. Yeah, no. I hope I rise to them.
It's pretty easy to jump up to something familiar.
Yeah, man.
I don't know that I had any specific expectations.
Well, Brother John, any expectations for today?
Any expectations for today?
Yeah, man.
It's in his hand. It's already been made.
Yeah, that's it. The second round, that's got to get it in. That's
One of them.
The coffee's good. Oh, nice. Don't put too much on the napkin, honey. It's not a plate. So what I was going to do today is, I'm gonna set some ground rules here quick. As we have discussions, the first like 45 minutes to an hour, we're gonna go for a bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask for clarity. Sometimes I skip over things that I assume. I'm trying to get better at that. But if they can wait until the second part where I can get my voice and break them down, just like an interactive discussion about this kind of thing. So those are kind of the ground rules. If we disagree, that's fine. I believe everyone in here is a follower of Christ. So I think we're able to that common ground. Ironically, I gave out like probably close to 100 to non-believers and about half of them said I'm definitely coming. And I mean, that's just how it is. So I talk with them mostly in person, but we're at the workplace, so I get to have a relationship and follow up and ask them questions like, what do you think of Jesus? And see what they say, because that's all what it's all about. I sort of, but not really, could care less about what's in the pew. It's all about them and their relationship. Have you read Scripture? What do you think about what he said? Not about what the church did. That's a different topic. So I was going to go over like all the major religions. I tried that. I can't do it. It's too much. So I'm going to try to start with Wicca. Wicca is the fastest growing religion in America at the moment. Does anybody know anything about Wicca?
a little bit of Wicca.
Well, yeah, it's roughly toward that direction. It was started in around 1950 by this guy named Gerald Gardner, and he says he was entered into the coven somewhere in Britain in like 1939. That kind of has no bearing on where Wicca went, because after him, you can ask, there's just about a denomination for every single person that branched off since then. So you ask a Wiccan what they believe, what they do, and they'll tell you different things. Could be the stars, could be reading palms, could be tarot cards. They borrow a lot from paganism. In Wicca, they see the masculine and the feminine spirits on the earth, basically. They can make a solid case for heaven, but it doesn't have to be. It very much borrows from the Eastern, like a karmic cycle. So like one of the mantras in there is like, whatever you give out threefold, you come back to. So whatever is good, if you put something good out, 3 times that will come back to you. But there's this book called The Witch's Ten Commandments, which kind of sums up that, but it's that and a mixture of paganism, because Wicca is it's clouded. Usually, this is something Nietzsche said, if you seek to be profound, then you seek clarity. You try to be as clear as possible. But if you want to appeal to the masses, you be obscure as possible. Because the masses will willingly walk into the waters, because they think anything they can't see the bottom of is profound. And you can think about that for like 20 minutes. It's such a strong statement. I really like Nietzsche. I'll probably bring him up a lot, and I actually have a poem or a story of his that I read just about every time I do this, because how Nietzsche philosophized was he took every single world you could possibly think of, and he took a hammer to it to see what would survive. And you probably know this, maybe you don't. So how we do science, right? If you have a hypothesis how this works, do you try to prove it? No, actually, you try to disprove it as hard as possible. And whatever's left, that's actually what's real and what's true. Right? You want to see what's like. You don't want to have your bias into it. You want to throw every single objection possible to it to see if it's still there, it's still standing. And that's how you should do science, because you're trying to put the hardest argument against it. That's one of the reasons I do this, is because I like Rabbi Zacharias. It really impressed me that after he gave his talk, which was good, he stood up there by himself, and all these people like Harvard and Oxford, Yale, professors and students would ask him the hardest possible questions of Christianity, and he would still along. So that was pretty impressive to me. I thought, wow, I'd really like to have that kind of knowledge, because I thought Christianity would die. But the question, why did they put the tree in the garden? Who answered that? But no one. So back to Wicca. Catastrophe going on there.
Tell us who Nietzsche is, just in case someone doesn't know.
Sure. Thank you. Friedrich Nietzsche. Yeah, he was a philosopher, and about age 22, he lectured. And I forget which halls he lectured in, but he was a lecturer at a university. And Dan Levy wrote a book called The Punic Wars and Other Christian Essays, and in there, the guy that talks about what it used to require to enter a school. What it used to require to enter a school is you have to be fluent in 3 languages and a competent understanding of major literature in the world to enter school. Imagine that now. Yeah. Please take your $150,000 loan. I don't care what you think. Just enter our school and get that for 20, 30 years. So that was Nietzsche. He would lecture in these halls. 22 being a lecturer. And it was the last time maybe you saw a professor that was that young. So this guy could keep a lot on his mind, and he could. They think his IQ was probably around 200, if not higher. So I've read a couple of his books. Beyond Good and Evil is probably his best one. When I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, that was, my brain kept turning, because it's the idea where, and he doesn't necessarily cast God aside, because he's putting a hammer to everything. But his idea is, one of the I guess clouds on Nietzsche is that his sister, who he called like an irrepressible anti-Semitic racist, she took his works, he's German, she took his works and interpreted it poorly for the sake of the Nazis. So they would search out the Uberman. But that wasn't what Nietzsche was going for, not in that sense where you need the purity of the white race. Like that's he's like, I don't care about that stuff. He was looking for what made man good no matter what. Like what makes the perfect, the ultra person, what does that look like? So this with Zarathustra, that's a whole, it's like every world if you throw God away, where does it go? That kind of thing. That's part of it. Once you think you understand Nietzsche, but you don't understand, read that book again. Something that's like way more brilliant. So there's multiple layers. He's way smarter than me. So someone like that, taking apart logical arguments and reason of mankind and all the past, he read everything. So I take what he said seriously. Some of the precepts he had were kind of wrong, I think, because the biggest one is you can't make your own values. He tries to put that out there. That's pretty much said, I think, with the Tower of Babel story. When God says, we, as a people, say, let's go make a name for ourselves. And God says, they're going to figure out how to decide what is right and wrong. And maybe that sounds kind of appealing immediately, but, child sacrifice is now the right thing. Well, that might be a problem. When you start to, go through society and culture. And there was a saying in the Tower of Babel, like, you read Jewish literature on this, if a person would fall from the top, no one would care. But a brick fell from the top, the whole city would mourn. It took a year to get it up there. So the actual structure was more important than the individual. So anyway, that's Nietzsche. He pounds the heck out of every possible thing, and that's kind of why I like him. And he said, we'll go back to Nietzsche in a second. So in Wicca, you have, and it's Wicca and paganism. Wicca, you have this saying where Augustine had a similar saying, but not quite. It's do no harm and live your life. That's the Wiccan philosophy. And that sounds kind of right? Be all-embracing and live your life. I don't think that works. It's a denial of reality, but that's their precept, and it's very, I would say, in the feminine nature because it's nurturing. We want things to be, and there's no conflict, and that sounds sort of like a utopia. The Wiccans borrow from the pagans. The pagans have this. They have multiple deities depending upon where you go. When you go in the East, there's a lot of different pagan religions. Even in India, there used to only be like 3 or 4. Now there's like 330 million or something like that. There's like 1 for every person. And ironically, that happened because Constantine chose to have Christianity as the major religion. And so he kicked everybody out. They went east, to India. So India took and adapted all those to theirs because they believe in both and logic system, which is, it's incoherent. It doesn't work. In paganism, what you do is you have your set of deities and you choose as a person which one is your highest. And you go toward that. And paganism also has this, I don't think they came up with it, but it's the one that the gentleman, he was literally a member of the gang called the Pagans in Harrisburg, and he was a pagan. He said it's, you're in a pit, and you're grabbing something, you think it's a snake. Someone else grabs something, and they think it's, they think it's something hard, God's a horn. They're all blind. They're having their perspectives on what it's actually an elephant. He's like, everyone has their own perspective on what this thing is. Well, and then he gave it the light analogy. He's like, everyone's looking at the light from a different side, and you're just looking at it from your own side. And I'm like, all right, well, that doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is who says it's an elephant? Who says it's a light? You're like assuming this spot in that analogy, as if you already know what everything's about. So you have absolute knowledge on all these topics, and this guy ironically got fired for fighting with someone who didn't agree with their work ethic. So why couldn't he see their perspective? I never had a chance to talk to the guy again. It was very frustrating. Like the guy was caught sleeping on a forklift. That is what it is. But it's like he got in his face about it, and they both yelled at each other. And the company has zero tolerance for fighting, even if you're the one being assaulted, which is just so weird. But that's a different topic. So they both got fired, and he didn't care to understand his perspective. He's like, that perspective is wrong, but maybe he's honoring God that way. That's why can't you understand that there's so much in the other waters here? So the stories of paganism are pretty varied. Once you get to further to the east, because the paganism itself borrows from the karmic cycle. No matter how far east you go, there's 2 things they usually, I would say they always believe in. One is the reincarnation principle and the karma principle. So this is the most logical one, I think. And when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, they went east. So when you're separated from the transcendent, all you see is the ground. You die, you go in the ground, stuff grows, animals eat the stuff, they have babies. That's you. That's the Atman. That's what they call the ultimate man. So that's the reincarnation cycle. And your goal is to be good, whatever that is. And wherever you are, you're constantly paying for the previous life. Now, you don't know what that life is. And every single, vision of hell, because there aren't very many visions of heaven. It's usually hellish, because it's a very sacrificial system. You lose your person. There's not a person in there with the name suffering. It's just people are suffering. They're on fire or whatever. And that's the creation story. One of the original ones is the whole world was created from the navel of Vishnu. That's not the arm of God. That's something else. I guess that doesn't matter. I just remember Ganesh. Ganesh is the elephant god of love.
Vishnu, that's the elephant, right?
No. Ganesh is the elephant.
Oh, okay.
The reason I started diving into really Eastern mythologies because I actually have some Hindis that are working with me now. So I'm like, well, maybe I should see where they're coming from and go from there.
You have what?
Some Hindis. Some from India? Yeah. First thing I did was read Gandhi's autobiography. He actually said the same thing Nietzsche did about Christianity. He's like, I like Christ and not Christians. As Nietzsche said, your convert's got to look a little bit more converted for you to follow Christ. That was Nietzsche's words to the church, basically. He's like, you guys are not impressing me. But he also said that Christ was the only Christian. And I can believe this like in 2 seconds. Like, imagine if you believed in God all the time, even in your thought life. Like, would you eat unhealthy ever? Because you know what God wants you to do. Like, really? Like, imagine actually believing in God. Would you be stagnant? Watch TV ever? You're wasting time. Now, these are things they're pretty profound when you think about it. So the creation story is, it's the creation and the end story is from the East. Everything goes back to one. So good and evil are an illusion. Good and evil are Maya. Maya is the illusion. Maya is the thing you have to escape from. And I think story is very important. If you look at, I think one of the biggest and only countries really doesn't have creation stories, China. They say they do, but after I read a lot of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell writes about every single myth that ever existed, as much as he could find. We have evidence for it, and he found the commonality between them all. And he said China doesn't really have them. The government kind of buried all their ancient stuff, like the really ancient stuff. So you have like Confucius, some sayings. Their oldest story they have, I think, on record is that one of an old king who worked themselves to death. And to me, a story is really important because you're always telling yourself, we're neat little computers who kind of call yourself that. You're telling yourself a story or a narrative of what life is about as you go through life and as you on your journey. Even words are a story. You can, I mean, what is this? It's a bottle. Or water, right? So let's go with bottle. Bottle sounds good. So it's not a bottle, it's something that can hold liquid. It doesn't have to be the shape, it can be a whole bunch of variants. But you say bottle, it's the thing that holds liquid. Or it can hold sand, it can hold something. This is why Jackie Chan, I think, was so popular, because he saw a ladder, he didn't see anything you climb, he saw something you hit, something you changed the hierarchy of the meaning, which was kind of funny to me. When that little one was 6 months old, my wife comes around the corner and she's actually on the kitchen table doing what 6 months old do. She climbed onto the chair and onto the table, so when she saw a table, to her it was something higher you stand on. So we took it. I'm not kidding. She couldn't walk. Like, she could just climb, and it was about this high. So she got up here and she was just like, you might have died. So we spent the next just about 2 years. Yeah, it was at least a year with the chair stacked up in the corner because we could not trust her not to like be up there and fall off. So that's words, definitions, and story. These things are important because they guide you in a certain direction. So I read the Gita, and I'm going to go over the Gita just a little bit. It would be roughly like the New Testament for the Eastern mind. There's the Vedas also, which I have yet to read, but it's this. From what I heard from the Hindus I talked with, this is the one that's the most articulate. In the Gita, you have Krishna and you have Arjuna. So Arjuna is prince. Krishna is supposed to be the one man. He is you, he is me, he is everybody ultimately realized. He remembers every single one of his past lives and all of his future lives. This story, so you have the prince. When he was young, he was supposed to take the throne, but he was too young. So his blind uncle took the throne instead. But when he grew up, his blind uncle wanted his son to take the throne. And so that's what they were about to fight over. And the picture is, it's on the battlefield. Krishna turns out to be this guy's like charioteer when they're having a conversation, because the prince does not want to fight. He doesn't want to do this war. Now in this war, nobody dies except for like a handful of people. So it's pretty bloody. So he's trying to appeal to Krishna because he somehow realizes that that's Krishna, my charioteer. And Krishna says, well, you should do it because it is your duty to your caste. This is something I really like out of the Eastern mind that we kind of lost in America. It's the concept of duty. What is your duty to life? Usually in an autonomous culture like ourselves, it's like, what is our duty to ourselves? And then we think maybe from there a little bit outward instead of our duty to life itself. So I think that's something that the Hindi community really has going on. So it's all about duty. You're in your caste. Do your duty to your caste. The outworking of that caste system, which is laid out in the Gita, is that if you're the untouchable or you're poor, I am doing you a karmic disservice if I help you. So why would you donate to anybody who's done that? You're doing them a disservice in the whole karmic cycle. So I can see this in, not all, because I have to be careful with this because everyone's an individual, but some who I work for that are Indians will literally look down their nose at me because I just work for them. I'm a lower type of person. So they don't feel obliged to treat me with respect. In America, it's a little different. We're autonomous here. We treat each other as we're made in the image of God. Even if we don't believe in it, it's in our law. So we kind of have to treat each other with dignity. It's a cultural norm here. Over there, not so much. So he was a warrior class. He was still to do his duty. And then so Arjuna asks, well, why? Why should I do that? And because Krishna says it's a good thing to do. And then he says, but it doesn't matter. But good is more real than evil. But it doesn't matter because I'll become one in the end. So that's an example of the both and logic system. It's like, it's more real, but it doesn't matter. So which one is it? It seems like the doesn't matter one kind of trumps anything else you might do because you're not, what's your incentive? And they also say things in there like you should work as if you're not getting a reward. I can sort of buy that, but not really, because we have, this is where I get a little shaky on it, because we have basic reward systems built in. I want a drink of water, I need that reward. Hey, that sounds good. It's my duty to protect my family, and I do that. That sounds right. So the duty is kind of like separated from, I would say the spirit really, it's separated from the essence thereof. They also say, if you want to go above, if you want to go to heaven, or at least a higher realm of heaven, then you want to practice detachment. You want to not be there. Detach yourself from things, from worldly pleasures, that kind of thing. But that's really weird because then the next breath, roughly, he'll say all of our laws are based on love. So what's the opposite of love?
Disattachment.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah. I'm like, well, this is just throwing me for a loop, man, because, people follow this stuff all the time. So the opposite, so it's founded on love, but you must practice detachment. So because even, to your point, hate, like at least an abusive parent will still feed the child, but an apathetic one, like do whatever, and that's where you get, well, like Detroit, a bunch of fatherless kids all over the place who are just trying to find their way without any guidance. It's not just Detroit, it's a lot of places, and more than I wish to care about. So then, what do we do about that? That's the next question, because it's one of the problem. We've got to figure something out with that, being of mentors, and that's a little task.
A little bit sounds like Star Trek stuff.
Yes,
That's where they
he was also a very incoherent character to me.
You were describing it, and I thought, oh my god, that's Spock, that's the Vulcans.
Yeah.
That's where it came from.
And he said that came, and it's very interesting, and like all this stuff is available to writers. Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry's not a Christian at all,
No.
but he, I don't know how much he read about Eastern thought, but I think he at least grasped it a little bit. So there's well, first off, I'm going to at least go into it. You guys can come in if you want.
The coffee house is not now. We're only open on Saturdays.
Only on Saturdays?
Yeah, just 9 to noon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, come back on Saturday.
I will.
Yeah, man. That's
Yeah.
we had a no effect shirt on too. So there, what Nietzsche said, because Nietzsche didn't spend much time on this on Eastern thought. He said roughly 2 things about it. He said, to assume illusion is to assume you can never find truth. Because in the Eastern philosophy, everything's an illusion. Even this, all of you people are illusions, even though we're all the same person. Like it's very contradictory, but this is what they live on. They live with contradiction. And the other thing he said, which we'll go to maybe next, is to assume enlightenment. Oh, sorry. Enlightenment is an excuse for an action. So you don't participate with the world. So you're enlightened.
Did you say excuse or inexcuse?
It's an excuse.
It's an excuse.
Sorry.
Are they saying that enlightenment is a good or a bad thing?
Well,
I'm not sure what the implication is.
that was Nietzsche said that. That was what Nietzsche
Oh, that was
said.
Nietzsche?
Yeah, he said enlightenment is an excuse for inaction, and I agree with him on that because if everything's not real, maybe I'm enlightened. Alexander the Great actually went east and met with some of the philosophers from the Hindu society. I read about this and I was just absolutely fascinated by it. And so him and Socrates followed him. They were kind of partners in this whole get up. Described Socrates as an incessant chatterbox, I think as we work myself. Maybe I'm on the correct path, I don't know. And they went over there, they're like, you want to talk to your philosophers? And the townspeople said, we're over there. They walk in and there's a bunch of naked guys like burning themselves on the rocks. And they look up at Alexander like, how are we going to talk philosophy with you? You still have your clothes on. Because they are detached. They're trying to not even feel pain. They're trying to just be so gone from reality to see enlightenment. So that's an action, really. And then they beg for food. That's the fourth caste. There's four castes, really. There's three castes, but then there's the non-class caste in the Hindu society. There's the warrior, the nobility, the untouchable, and then there's the non-caste, which is like the spiritual guides, and they basically beg for food. They're not allowed to have a job, that kind of thing. And this is, I don't know how it is in the past 100 years, because it's kind of dark over there right now, especially the India itself has kind of cut itself off. It's basically like India's for India these days. They're ramping up their energy production, that kind of thing. So the past 100 years, I don't know, maybe things change. But as far as at least recent history, that's how it's been. They say they abolished the caste system, but it didn't eat it. Even it has like a cool commentary that I read, and it said like it makes a light case for the caste system in here, but we don't really follow that. It's just not true. They absolutely believe the caste system over there, as far as I can tell, talking with Hindus.
So I heard you say caste earlier, and I thought you were like just referring to your neighbor there. So there's actually a caste sort of like just like different hierarchy of society.
Yes.
Like you're like just groups, right? Basically different.
So one of the biggest differences, like if we, like say I was being introduced to like a lot of people or something, this is, they'll go over my qualifications, my credentials, my lifetime achievements. Over there, they'll introduce a person, say all of his, and then say, this is his son. Because your family establishes who you are, not what you've done. It's not very meritorious, at least not to the next life. So what you do right now, again, it borrows from both ends. What you do now doesn't really have so much consequence as what you did before, and that comes from your bloodline. And don't try to think too hard about that. Maybe you were like a duck before, and now you just happen to be born into this family. Like it's very tough to figure out. So I say all that, going back to the do no harm and live as you will. So Augustine said something that's quite different. He said, maybe you guys heard this before, love God and do as you will. So that's kind of a contrast, right? One is for something, one is against something. So they're kind of different directions, like a tree, up and down. And I guess the last thing I can go over, really, well, that won't take too long, is Gautama Buddha. So Gautama Buddha, he was born in a royal household. His father was a king, he was a prince, and he wanted to have his son have the best life. So what he did was he raised him with nothing but wealth, nothing but beautiful women. All of his needs were constantly met. Never saw an old person, never saw anybody die. One day, he went on a chariot ride, and he saw somebody who was old. And he said, asked his charioteer, who was that? He described the process of aging. The next day he went out, he saw someone who was sick. And he asked the charioteer, who's that? He's never seen this before. This guy, he's at least a young man. He described the process of being sick, like this is the way of all men. Sometimes this happens. Then he went through, I think it was a funeral procession for, and he asked the charioteer the same thing. He's like, what is going on with that? He's like, this is the way of all men. We all die. That's how it happens. So he took a look at that, and he basically said, I want out. I want to go. I want to be enlightened. This is too much. And so he actually left his parents' home on the night where their son was born to go seek enlightenment. What's really neat to me, we just watched Wall-E last night. I'm sorry, 2 nights ago, right? And I was almost in tears just seeing all the stories that we've seen in that movie. I'm like, come on, I'm crying at Wall-E for it. But we tell ourselves these stories all the time. You guys ever see Sleeping Beauty? The old Disney one.
Yeah.
They didn't remake one, did they? Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So the old Disney one, it's the same story. So what happens? You have an old king and queen. They have a daughter, and they invite every single fairy except for Maleficent. She's the strongest fairy, and the good fairies are like, you can have a beautiful voice. You'll just be beautiful long hair. Well, then Maleficent comes in, and they're like, sorry, we forgot to invite you. And she's like, I'm not buying that at all. And so she says, on her 16th birthday, she'll put her finger on the spinning wheel and die. The last fairy's left, and she says, okay, no, she'll just go to sleep. And so what happens? She goes into the woods where everything's perfect. The animals are singing with her. Nothing's wrong whatsoever. She meets the first guy of her life. It's charming. I forget his name. He has one. It is Christmas. And then he leaves, and she's so distraught, she magically and willfully finds the only spindle in existence in the entire kingdom, and willfully thrusts her finger on it and passes out. Same thing. It's the same story, the same kind of concept. The pattern of you're sheltered your whole life. I'm not inviting evil into my child's life because, like her, I have to let her ride her bike without shoes sometimes. Just like if I see her doing it, I'll try to warn her. So she can maybe feel that pain, be like, hey, that's why my dad said don't do that. You have to have a little bit of pain in your life as you're growing up. You have to be, and this is the job of a parent, you recognize the stage your child grows and give and let them have a little autonomy, let them bounce off against the world. Otherwise, when they get old, they'll be just an adult child. They don't have any idea what to do. One little thing wrong happens to them and they'll go commit suicide. So that's the idea of that story. And that's also the story of Buddha. And Buddha wants to seek enlightenment. Now, there was a girl yesterday in here that was wearing a Nirvana shirt. She came in toward the end. She was a young girl. Do you guys know what Nirvana means?
It's a state of enlightenment, isn't it?
It's literally means to extinguish.
To extinguish.
It's not heaven. It's not bliss. It's nothingness. It's an escape from the cycle. There's no one there. You're not even there. Like you're not this. So what Buddha did is he found enlightenment. I'm not going to go through the whole story. It's quite long. But he found enlightenment and he's like, I got to take this back to my fellow man. And so he comes back. But that's a desire. So you're supposed to escape desires. Now I was just confused at the end of that story. So that's what Nirvana means. Nirvana means you guys have heard the band Nirvana? Serial killer himself. I mean, you can argue whether he did or didn't. That's fine. But the fact is, he is dead, and Nirvana was the name of this band. His lyrics kind of sing toward that direction, like a kind of realistic, grungy, emotional outburst. Yeah, it's the both and logic. But it's hard for me to buy that, especially if you want to do science correctly. Does the sun exist, whether I think it does or not? Is it yes or no, or is it both? I mean, probably yes, because we just have enough evidence for this. And then what we start doing if you adopt too much of the both and logic, which is I think why we're kind of pulling it from the East in America here, is language itself starts to get confused. Because you start having words meaning either having double meaning, or you just try to destroy the very foundation of the word itself, like men and women. That's under assault. What's the definition thereof?
But don't you think this is all deliberate?
Yes.
I think it's all deliberate.
It's communism.
Yeah. It's basically the bottom line. It's insane.
Well, yeah.
So then we have what's Satan?
What is it?
He hates humans.
Well, Satan is the accuser.
It's not.
So the accuser, the pessimist, is always right.
I can't get over I want to stop wanting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's exactly it. I got to the Buddha, you're like, man, really? Huh, okay. And everyone wants to be like that. I guess, I'm not sure. Because again, language gets confused. It's very, but that's what they had. And so, those are the two stories I wanted to present. And then, what's the last one? Yeah, maybe the second time I'll talk about Trinity, but I did want to present the concept of non-story because when you have a vacuum, something replaces it. That's the nature of space. It's the nature of soul and meaning and story. So we've had secularism since the Enlightenment, really, kind of reign a bit on our universities. And you notice this because you guys have heard of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung. Heard of him? Everyone's heard of Carl Jung. Yo, that's so cool. All right, so they parted ways, and the main reason they parted, they're both brilliant guys, by the way. I have one of Freud's books. He's proven wrong on a lot, but with what he had to go with and the conclusions he made, they were pretty smart. So the main difference between him and Jung is Freud was a materialistic atheist, so he got the seats at the universities. Jung was not. He believed that the myth and the story had power because they built our thinking. He took them seriously. You have to take them seriously. Men thought about these things through all of mankind. You have to take them seriously and see, like, where did that stuff come from? So that's Freud and Jung. And then Nietzsche also took a hammer against the Enlightenment because he had nothing better to do. But Nietzsche, what he would do is, toward the end of his life, he was sick. They think it's from syphilis, but we're not really sure. So he'd spend like all day in bed, get up and write for 2 hours, and then get back into bed. And that was his life for a very long time. So this guy would sit there and think, and he'd write some of the most compacted messages in those short lines. That's like you. So thus with Zarathustra, Carl Jung, it's only maybe 200 pages. Carl Jung wrote a 1,200 page commentary on just that. I mean, it's incredible, and that guy used to love writing. So I don't know if you guys heard this. I'm going to read Nietzsche's words that are roughly against the concept of having no story whatsoever. And this idea came on through a lot of people in history. Diderot, Marquis de Sade, Darwin, the idea that your timeless matterless chance, that survival of the fittest. For Freud's contribution, it's everything's all about the sexual nature. Everything always goes back to that. Sort of right, but not really. That's a very shallow way of looking at it. This is what happens when. It's like putting him to sleep. Yeah. It's all right. So this is a parable called The Madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, "I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God." So many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, excited considerable laughter. "Have you lost him then?" said one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" said another. "Was he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated?" Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. "Where has God gone?" he cried. "I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. And how have we done this? How are we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us a sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns. Are we not perpetually falling backwards, sideways, forwards in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more nights coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead. We have killed him. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? With what water can we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed. Whoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and again regarded his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. And at last he threw his lantern to the ground and it broke and it went out. "I have come too early," he said then. "My time is not yet come. A tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds require time, even after they are done, before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the stars, yet they have done it themselves. It has been further related that on the same day, the madman entered diverse churches and there sang a requiem, let out and quieted. He is said to have retorted each time, "What are these churches now? They are not the tombs and sepulchres of God." So that's about the most powerful thing I've ever probably read as far as atheism goes.
Well, that goes back to, like you said, Christ is the only Christian.
Yeah. Well, it's the concept of separating yourself from myth. We watched Wall-E. Has anybody not seen Wall-E?
Well, it's the little robot.
Right. So Wall-E is a myth. He's the robot that like makes the bricks of trash on Earth. So Wall-E's myth is he has this recording of this old musical. What's that musical? It's a musical. They're singing and dancing, and they hold hands and sing love songs. He watches it like every day, and he records it and he plays it back to himself. That's his myth. That's something he lives for. So you separate yourself from something you have lived for or will live for, and you're just in the middle. And well, what's your guidance? Where are you going? Why are you here? Nihilism takes over, and he made two predictions. The first one was that the 20th century will be the bloodiest century in human history, and the universal madness will break out. Well, the 20th century, we killed more people than the previous 19 put together with nuclear weapons. We can understand Hitler because Hitler was, the Nazis were very good at keeping records of what they did. You go east, and they estimate you take an extra zero what Hitler did. That's kind of what they did over in China and in Russia. So they didn't care. They did everything in the dark. They didn't log anything. They had quotas to meet, and that was how it was. They started their own people, slave labor camps, en masse, and we only know at least a little bit about the Russian version of it. So because we do like Archipelago, you've listened to all three of those. I gotta pace myself, man. There's some heavy stuff in there. So that's what happens when you untether yourself from story, from a unifying story that puts you all on the same place toward the same aim that's not material. And Christ said, you can serve God or you can serve money. You can't do both. So if we're just going on the material, well, other things suffer. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychologist and I think an actual doctor in the concentration camps. When he was recognizing, when they all would recognize someone's about to die, we're all emaciated. All of us weigh at least 2 or 3 times as much as they were sticks and bones. When someone was about to die, they wouldn't get up. They would lay there when the morning call was coming. They knew the consequences. They would find their only cigarette they were kind of allotted to their entire time there. They would just smoke because they appealed to the immediate. They lost their vision for the future. And that's what happens when you tether yourself from the story. So I think I was going to do a piece on the Trinity. I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about Joseph Campbell a little bit because I think it's important. So as Christians, this is mainly apologetics, right? Apologetics mean to give an answer for why you believe. So if you're going to talk with somebody about your faith, it's good to know a little bit about theirs. And so I read this guy named Joseph Campbell because my main question, the way I started in all this was really neat. I think so. We had Jehovah's Witnesses knock on our door. And this was after the same year we had bought a house, she was pregnant, and I just got a job promotion. And I'm like, once she was a child, for some reason, something like, this life's gotten a little serious. I'm like, how do you guide another conscious being into the world? So I'm like, maybe you should go to church. She's like, well, I used to go to church at the Open Door when I was a teenager. I'm like, cool, let's go there. So I went there. That's when they knocked on we were living in a trailer at the time, saving up money. That's when they knocked on my door and they said, do you believe in Christ too? And I said, okay, come on in, let's talk. And then I asked my pastor about them. He said they were wolves in sheep's clothing. And I'm like, well, I like reading books. I was reading fancy novels at the time. They gave me one called the Watchtower Society. And, well, that tells you about the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's all I knew. All right, so they're over there. Thank you. And you can read this stuff. There's still stuff on microprint. Like, for example, Charles Taze Russell says he made his own rendition of the New Testament. They had him in court because he was being sued over grains that he said were blessed by God, produced 10 times more, it's during the Great Depression, than any other grain. So he's being sued because they did not do that. And the lawyer asks him, what is this? And he says, I have no idea. It turns out to be a letter of the Greek alphabet. How can you make your own copy of the New Testament, translate it if you don't know Greek? You need to know Greek to do this. So
Just proves it's a miracle.
it's gotta be. That's all we learned. You know what? I never thought. So that led me to reading. So Walter Martin was the author of that book, and then he wrote a book called Kingdom of the Cults, and that's a monster, and that tells you every single cult that's ever existed, really, and details of it. Scientology. There's some really weird ones in there. Mormons, the Baha'i faith, everything possible. I've read it like 3 times. What's that? Latter-day Saints, yeah, and Mormons. The Mormons and Latter-day Saints are like 2 branches. Mormons actually, it's called a pejorative word. They don't like being called that. I don't know what they like being called, to be honest, but I know they don't like being called that. And there's been, I only did like foundational history, but my friend was telling me about some of the recent stuff that went on, especially in Mexico, dealing with that. It's very interesting. And there's the whole celestial marriage. You get your own planet. It's very weird. So Scientology, but yeah, so I like knowing these stories so I can know where people come from. They, believe this. Well, tell me more about that. And I can see if what I've read bounces off what you're telling me and see if those mix, match. We had Mormons come to our house twice, and they never came again. Because eventually I was just like, I need to know where the archaeological evidence is. And then we'll be back with somebody who knows. And that was it. That's pretty much it. It was a longer conversation where I tried to be gentle until finally I just hit him with that one. So, Joseph Campbell wrote about all these myths. He wrote about all the stories. So, let me get back to that story. The Kingdom of the Cults. So I did Kingdom of the Cults, and then I lost my job one day, which is a story in itself. And as I was driving with my oldest daughter to school, the C.S. Lewis Institute came on the radio advertising. And so I wrote it down as I was driving, which I shouldn't have done, but I did. And I called them, and I've been part of that institute for the past like 5 years, and it's an amazing discipleship program. You do a lot of work, and there's a liberative mentoring process to it, and you're with a triad, so it's like roughly getting a doctorate in a year. It's pretty intense, but it gets you really familiar with this kind of stuff. And so since then, I'm trying to think what is authentic. Is it the church? Because the church, from what I understand, that comes from the German translation of the Greek. It's like the originally I think it's ecclesias, which is the called out ones. And then in German, it can mean like the called out ones or like one or the other. And that's where we get church in the building from. Something like that. So I'm like, what is actually important to me? Becoming a priest or actually talking with people. So I like talking with people. And then I started, my question's always been, where is Christ in like China 200 BC? Like how on earth are those people going to know? Have known? Does God condemn them? Were they just lost? Have they been lost? Is he an impartial, cruel God? And I came across this guy, Joseph Campbell, and I forget honestly how I got to him. I think I know Jordan Peterson quotes him a bit, so that might have been one route. And he's also associated with Carl Jung a little bit. He was after, he died like in the 1980s. But he wrote about every single myth that ever existed, but he put them all on the same plane. So Christ, same hierarchy. They're on the same. And he found something that was really interesting. I thought he was like, what's the commonality in all these faiths? And it's something like it's actually circular. It's the same myth in every story. It's you start out in normal. You're going to go down, and it's interesting. You put a cross on it right there. That's the normal. And you go down here, and you're going to die. Or part of you is, and you might have a mentor, and then you're going to be lifted up. The part of you that didn't die is going to come back with a gift for the rest of humanity. And that's the same message in every single culture that's ever existed. It's there. It's the idea of overcoming. The human myth is not, it's closer to Augustine. It's not do no harm and live as you may. Why is that a problem? What's the problem with that?
do as thy will is satanic ideal.
Okay.
Wait, what's the problem with which?
The one that says,
The Augustine
do
or
no,
Wicca?
do no harm, and then live as you may.
Because that only negates the negative. It doesn't put forth anything positive.
Yep, you're not living for something. It also is right up there with Plato's statement where, the consequence of being indifferent to politics is to be ruled by evil men. You can't fight evil with that philosophy. It will run all over you. This is why I can't get into the Mennonites where it's a non-violent policy. The whole job of Adam is to protect the family unit to the point where you give your life for the family. Like that's your job. And there's a lot of things with the masculine-feminine relationship, and you can even echo it back to the creation history, and it takes a bit to unpack that, so I'm not going to do that right now. The idea is between man and woman. She respects you and you love her. And there's a very old myth, and it's also in just about every culture, at least ones I've read, it's about the blind old man and the the old man who can see into the future and the blind daughter. Does that sound familiar? No, maybe not. You guys seen Little Mermaid? So that's the story, roughly speaking. Triton says the humans are terrible, they're evil. He is big, dude, and he's got a beard. He said, you go out there, your life's going to be changed, and it's not going to be for the better. And he's right. Like, he's right. He really is. Like, his wife got killed if you watch the second movie. But he can see into the future. But the thing is, he won't do anything except for his blind daughter. She only cares about what she feels. So he has to kind of protect her. And that's Adam and Eve. That's also you and me, by the way. Right? We eat and drink because we think and we know and we perceive what to eat and drink correctly. We treat ourselves correctly because we know what the consequence of not doing that is. And that's the flesh versus the abstract, really, in the mind. Right? We take showers. Hygiene's a good thing. What happens if you don't? Well, you'll feel terrible. When you need a drink of water, who are you talking to? Right? There's elements of you. This is the id, the ego, the superego, which Freud came up with too, which is a very, very smart way of looking at your mind. You are actually the person. You describe it like this: the id's the horse. You're trying to control it. You're the ego, and the superego is like the rule set that you're trying to follow, the path you're trying to follow. But the thing is, you need to let the horse have a drink once in a while. So sometimes you let it take control, but you're ultimately trying to listen to this. And I think one of the differences between, if you take that analogy and take that on the animals, like the animals don't have a myth. They just follow their play set, and they do things, and they're just kind of merged right here. That's like all the animals out there, as far as I can tell. We have a gap. We have that thing in the middle. We can choose not to do the right thing if we want to. And that's all of what God says, really.
So you're saying that Wiccanism is popular because there's no responsibility?
Well, there's that. It's popular because this is the idea of, you guys have heard the saying, being so open-minded, your brain falls out. It's kind of true, because it's the idea of totalitarian tolerance. Everything is okay. Yeah, that's the whole concept. Everything's fine. Yeah, everything will be okay. Just let them do whatever, do as you will. That's not reality. It only takes a few evil people to exploit that. Like, not very many at all to destroy the planet. So Adam, the masculine, that's women too, because we have both parts inside of us. You got to pay attention. That's the whole idea. And in Revelation, when he's talking about the churches, the lukewarm church is the one he has one of the fiercest darts against. Because I want you to be hot or cold, because you're lukewarm. I'm going to spit you out. Because that's an action. You're not doing anything. You're just going about the motions. You're doing your routine. You think you have an insurance policy. You're not being proactive, not paying attention. And Joseph Campbell found that, and I'm like, that's brilliant. And after reading the Bible quite a few times, what it seems like is Melchizedek comes out of nowhere. He's the priest of the Most High God. He's one of, after Abraham fights a war to get Lot back, he comes and just blesses him. Where'd that come from? From what I understand, God holds you accountable based on what you know. And sometimes, and you can get this from Job and from Elijah, in Job, God answers him in a whirlwind. It's so convenient having you guys already be roughly scripture oriented, so I don't have to explain that too much. So he asks a question. He basically wants an audience with God. Why? That's his big question. Like, why'd you do this to me? God answers him in a whirlwind. But what's left is Job saying, What's he say?
Sorry. Turn.
Basically, yeah. It's the still small voice.
Yeah.
It's the voice of conscience. Like, who am I to know what actually is involved in making being be? Like, I don't know. And we saw this crazy, like, strawberry tentacle-looking feather thing. Like, stuff grows in the dark in our oceans, and maybe that's the nature of life.
Oh, yeah.
It'll grow.
The luminescent algae and bacteria.
I don't know what it is. It's crazy. But stuff grows in the dark, and it's scary looking. And that's the nature of water. That's the nature of chaos. It's potential and beauty at the same time. That's the feminine element.
Don't forget that was created by God.
Yeah, but sometimes
And God is a God of order, but He's not a God of chaos.
well, he's both. And the reason I say he's both is because both exist. And you can't have. I'll borrow an analogy from Jordan Peterson. So you know what a chaotic house looks like, right? You go in there, you don't know the difference between the kitchen and the bathroom. They're both the same thing. You go into a house that's too ordered. The carpet's combed in a certain direction. You can't even step. You feel like you're violating the place being there. You can't have kids there. So I think you're mostly right. The only reason I think you're mostly right is because you need the head to lead the heart. For the sake of that's the old man and the blind girl analogy too. The head leads for the sake of the heart, and that's order has to lead, but for the sake of being really, for anything to be, and in order for new things to come about, you have to have a little disruption in the world. So I do agree with the premise, the outer shell of the garden is the order premise. And that's Adam and Eve again. That's everything outside of the jungle. It's Adam's job to recognize when something might come in and say no to that. And so that's
But you didn't do it, the garden.
absolutely not.
He's screwed up.
That's Adam should have been vocal. It's Eve's, in my opinion, it's Eve's nature to look for what's best because she is embracing and she is nurturing and she will. That's the nature of the feminine. That's the nature of creativity. You want to make everything work. But masculine says no. If you're in a relationship for long term, you can see this, right? The women statistically think more about themselves into the negative, and the reason that is, I think, because life is lived right inside you. That's just how it is. Where you're going to be vulnerable, pretty hardcore when you have a kid. So that's kind of biologically in you. And as you work with a mage, you're going to find someone who will be there for you consistently through your ups and your downs. Like they'll be your rock you can stand on. And you got to be very careful who you choose. And so in your relationship, oftentimes your significant other will flat on you and depressed. It's the masculine's job to lift you up. It's okay, we got this, right? And then the feminine side is the best side because they prevent me from doing things like thinking I can fly. You know, they were like, you can't do that. Or she will tell me, my wife here. She'll look at me and be like, you're cranky, go lay down. You need to sleep more. Like, you're not you right now. Go take a nap. Okay. So she'll stop you from doing things that you think you can do, but you're not God. And that relationship works well. And then the future generation gets to see that. And then life turns out to be more like that. So Joseph Campbell, that hero, he calls it a hero's journey. The idea where you go down into the darkness and you come back. That's the commonality in all the religions that have existed. And that's nowhere personified more greatly than in Christ. And actually happen to have something by C.S. Lewis, which will end with a discussion. Because C.S. Lewis was infatuated by myth right before he became converted to Christianity. It was really interesting. That's why he wrote stories. He felt stories the best way to communicate to people. So he said, this is from a letter to Arthur Greaves. Now, the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, with this tremendous difference that it really happened, and one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering that it is God's myth, where the others are men's myths, like the pagan stories where God expressing himself through the minds of poets, using such images as he found there, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things. Therefore, it is true not in the sense of being a description of God that no finite mind can take in, but in the sense of being the way in which God chooses to or can appear to our faculties. The doctrines we get out of the true myth are, of course, less true. They are the translations into our concepts and ideas of that which God has already expressed in a language more adequate, namely the actual incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. Does this amount to a belief in Christianity? At any rate, I am now certain A, that this Christian story is to be approached in a sense as I approach other myths. B, that it is the most important and full of meaning. I am also nearly certain that it really happened. So that's C.S. Lewis.
And that was right before Christian.
Yeah. And C.S. Lewis was also one of those guys. C.S. Lewis never got beyond 2. He had a giant library. He wrote I think he wrote the history of English poetry, something like that. He said, he made it a mantra that he had to read every single thing that was ever written in the 15th century. And everybody thinks he actually
It was non-fiction.
It was non-fiction?
I think.
Yeah, something like that. It was like the,
Or wait,
it was not the romantics.
maybe it was the other way around.
Yeah, my mind's switching on that.
No, maybe it was all literature.
I think it was everything. Yeah, because he was, and he had a mind, like first off, he wrote every one of the audiobooks by hand. Like he was just all about, he's like, how can you write anything with typewriting? Times I would think about it. And then like you could pull a book out of, they used to do this when they would drink, pull a book out of his library and start reading and finish the paragraph for you. Like he was also one of those guys who was just like way up here gifted and uses it properly. So what I wanted to present to you was the idea creeping here that we see from like Wicca was, don't hurt anybody and do as you will. With the idea of totalitarian tolerance mixed in politics, everything is okay. It's unhealthy. Love God and do as you will. So Augustine said that aims and directions. So what's it mean to love God? Well, we should make sure life is properly maintained. And sometimes you have to say no to certain things, lest evil just come in and corrupt you. And to talk to people about this, you ask them what their story is. And eventually you can find that hero myth. It'll have to come out of them. People have a reason to live. The most difficult people I have to talk with are people that say, I don't see what the big deal is. That's the opposite of love. It's a difference. Very hard to talk to people that have no fire in them. Usually I would say God, from what I've seen, and it hasn't been too much, but it's been enough, that's when, this is in the book of Judges, they let the veils back in. So what happens? They start crying out. So what does God do? He gives them a judge. And it's not pretty every time. It's terrible. And that's what happens when the left goes too far. I really don't want to see that because then the right will step in and then it's not going to be good. It's going to be a good thing. That's all I have to present to you guys. I'm going to take a minute.